Welcome to Chai Convos, where we will always try to have meaningful conversations with inspirational individuals. This is Namrata. I'm your host. Today, I have a highly accomplished guest with me, and I'm honored to have her with me. She has been the recipient of the White House Champion of Change Award back in 2013. She helped train and coordinate the 1996 Olympic Crisis Response Team. She has received the Georgia Commission on Family Violence Gender Justice Award. Recently, in 23-24, she was listed in the top 500 most influential leaders in the Atlanta 500 list by the Atlanta magazine. And I can go on and on and on. She has a lot to her in her work of line. So without any further ado, I introduce to you our guest of today, Executive Director of Raksha Organization, Aparna Bhattacharya. Aparna, welcome to the show. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny Sunday.
Yeah. Sorry you had to wait a little bit.
No, waiting is part of where we explore and learn more.
Yeah. Let's dive right in because there are lots of questions I want to ask you. Even our pre-podcast conversation, we almost talked for 40 minutes? Yeah. 45 minutes?
We sure did.
So my first question has 3 sub-questions to it. You can answer it however you want to. First is, of course, for our viewers who don't know what Raksha is, if you could talk a little bit about what Raksha Organization is, what you all do, because you all do so much. Second, of course, is how did Raksha happen to you? I remember one time we were having a conversation and you had mentioned that you wanted to become an attorney.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, like a lawyer. So how did you get into Raksha? And of course, the third thing I want to know is any childhood memory that you feel has helped define who you are today?
As long as I can remember, I always wanted to work on gender-based violence and working with families who have experienced abuse, children who've been abused. So I knew that was a path I definitely wanted to go down. And I thought being an attorney would be the way to be able to help families and individuals who've experienced abuse. And so that was a path that I had explored, right? And so I got a degree in criminal justice.
Nice.
And, while I was in college, I got an opportunity to volunteer with the Victim Witness Assistance Program. I remember one of my professors was a judge for City of Atlanta, and I was like, oh, let me check this out because this sounds like something I want to do. And at the time, being a victim advocate was a relatively new field. So I was like, let me start volunteering. And one of the things that I noticed was it was the victim advocates who spent more time with survivors than the lawyers did, right? And of course, this was preliminary hearings, but I definitely felt like this was the path I wanted to take because I could spend more time with the individuals and I was helping, problem solve.
And you know their story too, because you're spending so much time with them.
And then we would make recommendations to the attorneys and judges, but then the laws changed and advocates could not speak in court anymore. But I think that's a lot of what we did is we were helping get resources, we were getting the story, we were informing and making recommendations as victim advocates, which is why I decided, well, this might be the path where I can use my creativity and really support survivors long term. And that's why instead of going to law school, I really followed the route of being a victim advocate because that helped me think about where I wanted to be. The other question was, what brought me to Raksha? Right, and what Raksha does. I always forget. I always want to go into the stories and the content. Raksha, as you know, which means protection,
It's a Sanskrit word, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
You would know better than I would.
It's a Sanskrit word, and in English it means protection, to protect.
Protection or safety, I think it depends on
the context,
the context and who you're talking to. So it means protection, and our mission is to promote a stronger and healthier South Asian community through support services, education, and advocacy. At the end of the day, we're about providing healing, not providing, but helping folks find healing, empowerment, and justice, specifically for South Asian survivors of violence. And we've been around, like next year will be our 30th year.
Wow.
And I started as a volunteer, and I've been with the organization pretty close to when it started to now, 29 years later, and I've had different roles.
Wow, 30 years. I didn't know.
Yeah, I can't believe it's going to be 30 years. Time has flown for the organization.
And you have been with them for how long?
I mean, almost since the beginning.
Wow.
Almost 29, yeah.
Yeah.
I probably came in within 3 to 4 months of it starting. I started as a steering committee member. At one point, I was a board member, and then I became the first full-time staff member as the executive director, as the default title at 26, 27 years old.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then how I came to Raksha was actually fascinating. Is I was working for City of Atlanta as a victim advocate, and my father had handed me the flyer for Raksha. It was, I think, at Taj Groceries or something. He saw it, and he thought, oh, I thought you'd be interested in this.
Wow, your dad did.
Yes, because he knew this was the work I wanted to do, and I was already doing victim advocacy stuff. So he had handed me the flyer, and I thought, oh, okay, let me call up, find out about this organization. And because I was working on the Olympic crisis response team, I thought, okay, it'd be great to connect with the South Asian organization because, you know, if we have South Asian folks visiting, we might need Raksha, the volunteers of Raksha, to really help. So it was a great way for me to kind of integrate that in the work I was already doing. And so I called up Sunita and became a volunteer, and my life has changed ever since.
Yeah. And here you are today.
Yeah.
Any childhood memory that you feel helped define who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot. I don't know that we could go into all of it. I definitely, there's a few things, didn't have a perfect childhood by any means. We struggled, my dad had a business partner who was an alcoholic, so I remember a lot of conflict in the house, a lot of fights. I remember dealing with bankruptcy because I know my dad was adventurous and they would try and start restaurants. We had a restaurant here in Atlanta. We had one in New York. And, while he was a civil engineer by trade, he was trying new things. My dad grew up, his mom died when he was 6 years old. And so he didn't grow up very well off. Yeah. And so he was always trying to do what he could to help his family, to support his family. And, he was a dreamer, definitely a dreamer. Big dreams. We struggled a lot. We've dealt with a few bankruptcies, so you know what it's like to deal with conflict, it's like families fight, all that I think has probably motivated me to do this work, but to also show up for community and to have some real conversations. Yeah. Because I think we don't talk enough about the things that are happening that's not a celebration.
We don't
talk about the tough stuff. And we worry often about like how the rest of the community is going to judge us. And I think I want to change that because we have to be real. And that's the only way we're going to end some of the toxic things that we have in our families. How do we end the generational traumas? Is that we have to have some real conversations and do our inner healing work, right?
Very true. There's a social stigma, I feel, around certain topics. It still persists in the society.
Absolutely.
Domestic abuse is one of them, and mental health is another one of them. I do want to do a podcast on that, actually. For some reason, you're right. We as a community, we don't feel very comfortable in talking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it's so important because we're human beings. None of us are perfect.
Yeah.
And as my husband was so brilliantly would say, it's like we're not given this manual when we're born on how to live our lives, how to deal with conflict, how do we deal with the tough things. We're figuring it out as we go along. And then we learn things from our families so that sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not so great.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, very, very true.
And then how do we end, the generational trauma? So like I think about, I also think that like kind of generationally, am I doing this work? Was there something genetically that told me to do this work? I grew up always hearing wonderful things about my paternal grandfather, that he was a freedom fighter and that he, had all these morals, that he, was a lawyer but did not want to lie, right? So then...
How did that work?
He didn't practice law, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I found out later on is that he had a temper, right? And that was passed on. I remember, hearing that, like, my aunts at one point put salt or sugar, it was reverse, put one of them in a meal, and that he threw the plate against the room or against the thing because he was so frustrated that it wasn't what he wanted, right?
Yeah.
And while he had all these good things, there was a pattern of how he showed his temper that I think passed down and my dad saw. Then there's a story of my mom using a pressure cooker when they were first married, and the steam kind of burnt her face. Not horribly, but he was so scared, right? And yelled at her, right? Because he learned that yelling is, that was his frustration. It's what he had seen. As a child, if I hurt myself, I remember being too scared to tell my dad because I was afraid he would yell. As an adult who looks at the whole pattern of my dad's life history, right? What he's been through, what I realized is the reason he would freak out and get scared was because we didn't have health insurance.
Wow.
His mom died at 6 of TB, which is preventable, right? If you don't have the health insurance, you don't have the money, how do you provide the health care for the people you love? And that's a financial strain, right?
And deep down, it is there, buried somewhere. It just comes out in a lot of different ways.
So I have a lot of forgiveness for him now as an adult, or even like, in my college age, understanding where he was coming from. It was his fear speaking, why I would be so scared of him. But that man could love like nobody's business, right? And so I think it was his absolute love and fear combined together of losing another person in his life that made me so scared of him as a little kid. As an adult, I was like, whatever, I got you. I understand who you are.
I have goosebumps up as you were talking about this.
Yeah, but that's the generational trauma.
We can all relate to it, yeah, definitely.
And I wonder, as I hear stories, as I started to work at Raksha, I would hear both my parents talk about the potential that both their moms probably experienced some form of violence, right? And so that's the whole reason why I think generationally, I kind of wonder if, that was something generationally speaking to me that made me want to do this work and why it was so important for me to do this work and why it's, it's my passion. It's something I can't imagine.
I can see it.
Else,
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't think I would have known that when I was younger, why I wanted to get into it. Now, years later, I think I look at it and I go, oh, maybe that's why I do this. Maybe this is my way of changing the generational trauma or changing the path, that our family takes.
Wow, this was deep. Yeah. So, going back to Raksha Organization, can you provide some insight into the cases that the organization says? I have a little idea, and I know Raksha Organization, but to our viewers who have no idea what you all deal with, and I know maintaining all the confidentiality that you have to.
Yeah, and I must say that we must keep things confident.
Definitely, totally. Only whatever you can, however you can say. I just want our viewers to have some idea upon on how and what we see and we deal with.
So we work with individuals who are survivors of violence, most of them with
domestic abuse,
mostly domestic violence.
Okay.
And we work with
refugees too. I was reading on the website and it said somewhere like immigrants /
refugees that are of South Asian origin. Yeah,
okay.
Some refugees. Okay. So our focus is, of course, the South Asian community, right? But, here's the reality. Raksha has been able to grow, not because, and I don't mean to diss community support, but yes, community support's important thing.
Of course.
We got a lot of money from federal grants because the community's had a hard time thinking that this is something that's real in the community. It took time to get that support. So we had to apply for federal grants. So when you get federal grants, while our focus can be the South Asian community, we can't also discriminate. And I don't think it's a part of our personality to even discriminate against folks that come our way. And we have portions of our population that might be refugees, right? And actually my first work with an immigrant / refugee, after working for City of Atlanta, I worked for a refugee-based organization being an employment specialist for folks who are survivors of violence. So while our focus is immigrant community, we have served some refugees and we have populations that are now becoming refugees, like the Bhutanese community came in as refugees. We have the Rohingya community that's come in as refugees.
Okay.
But there are also refugee organizations that are providing support services, and there's not a lot for the folks who might come in as immigrants. And so that's part of our focus. And there's other immigrant communities that we have supported. But yeah, our focus is, of course, the South Asian community.
Okay.
And that's who we serve. And gender is also not, we serve men who've been survivors of
I was
violence.
going to ask you that is it for men to,
Yes.
for domestic abuse? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so men have been abused. And I think when we talk about domestic violence, it is about power and control.
Yes.
Who has the power?
Yes.
And who is using it to control the other person? And that can fall in many, many different ways. So there have been some men that we've helped, definitely have helped some women. Also, we deal with other victims of violent crimes. So we've had folks who might be at their workplace and they've experienced an extreme act of violence and they're traumatized by it. And so we've provided counseling for victims of crime. Some of our money is under the Victims of Crime Act. And we don't have anyone else in the community that would really do that. I mean, if you've been a victim of a crime and you don't have health insurance, where would you get that counseling?
Yeah.
Right? And where would you get that support? And counseling in your own language, right?
So you have, how many languages do you, I guess, a lot?
Do we have covered?
Yeah.
So probably on staff, we probably have 8 to 10 languages. That we could provide support services in. But then we also have access to language learning. So we would get interpreters, or we have funding to be able to hire interpreters.
We have those too, at the hospital. Yeah.
Exactly.
Use the language line. Yeah.
Federal guidelines. So we have to provide meaningful access to limited English proficient individuals.
Yeah.
So we would access interpretation if needed, and then or we would outsource counseling to someone who might speak that language. So one time you might have someone who has a specialty, and then what we do is try and work out getting someone else to help provide those services. So we might help pay for those services if needed.
Dude, this is nice. I have volunteered for Raksha too. I have come to the gala and all that. I didn't know it was men. It was for men as well. For the longest time, I thought Raksha was only for women.
I know. I think that's the myth, right?
Yes.
That's often the myth. We have helped men. And it does get tricky because sometimes if you have someone, we've also had individuals who might call and lie about their situation so that they can somehow get help and prevent someone else from getting services. It could be male or female, right?
Really? Can you talk more about that?
Well, I think it's, sometimes if they know someone's getting help, they may also try and call to help kind of.
Oh, okay. I think I see what you're saying. Okay.
It becomes a competition of so I'm actually, I'm not saying men aren't abused. I've also had women that were kind of wait a minute, what's going on? Or they're both calling, right? We've had a situation where both of them called, and I think they were both trying to get support, but you kind of felt like they were both kind of manipulating the situation.
Oh, so they're both from the same house.
Yes. I mean, that was years and years ago, but I remember they were both trying to get supportive services. And
that can get tricky.
That can get very tricky. And sometimes you're okay, because somebody might want to one-up the other one. I mean, I think you have actual situations where there's domestic violence and there's a strong power and control. And then there could be something where it's just an unhealthy relationship and they're both doing things that are pretty rough.
How do you handle that? I mean, it's rare.
I don't know. Yeah.
That this type of a situation, but
sometimes, you have to figure out you have to kind of listen to the story. That's why we require intake, that we have to kind of get more information on what's going on.
Yeah.
And figure out what the individual wants.
Yeah.
Right. And then kind of you can probably get a feel for, is this just about them wanting to one up each other, or is someone actually scared and fearful, and what is going on here? We're here to provide supportive service for the individual that calls us. We want to make sure there's no conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're both calling, that becomes something that could be conflict of interest.
Yes. Yeah.
And so then we had to refer someone out to other services and then hope that the court system or whatever figures it out. Because we're not always going to know the full story. Right. It's what's presented to us. So that can be complicated. But that's why I think counseling is so we learn how to deal with conflict in healthy ways that is important for some relationships, but some there's actual abuse and there's power and control. I know people always talk about, oh, well, couples counseling and let's mediate. In some situations, that might work. That's if you're both willing to do the work, you're both willing to reflect on yourselves. But I think sometimes that's not safe to do. And I think people think, oh, well, let's just talk and do couples counseling. But if one person doesn't feel safe telling their story to the other person,
it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Because they're not going to be comfortable talking about it. Yeah.
And then what are the consequences when they get home if they do tell their truth? Right? That's when you might want to really look at what's happening. And how is someone manipulating the situation? Is one person trying to really spin it and try to make sure that someone's on their side? I think we all see that in our community where people end up trying to manipulate and you know,
definitely.
It's complicated. It's not easy. So there's some training individuals to really look at some of those situations. But we're not there to mediate. We're not there to do mediation. We're there to provide support for a survivor and let them figure out their own path of what they want and what's important for them and to make their own voice.
So I have one more question, Aparna, and you can talk in detail about that because I do want you to kind of, give your views, and you see this a lot at Raksha happening too. Oftentimes, people who are going through difficult phases, difficult situations, difficult relationships, domestic abuse, what have you, they often find themselves alone in the situation. They don't want to talk to their friends. There is a fear of being judged. What will she think? What will he think? What will society think? What will they say? What is going to happen? What can one do to help and support oneself in this situation?
Number one, it's important to know that isolation is a big part of the power and control in a domestic violence situation. Whether it's a family's, violence plays out in many ways, whether it's domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault. People feed into the idea that
there's verbal and non-verbal abuse.
And verbal abuse is sometimes harder to prove and harder to recover from because it's not as concrete.
It plays on you emotionally.
Exactly. The term that they use is often gaslighting, right? Making you feel like you're crazy, making you feel like what you see is not a reality.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to be aware that verbal abuse is also a strong component. Yeah. For many people, seeing the bruises, seeing physical violence is a lot clear cut in their mind, but the verbal abuse lasts a lifetime. How we heal from the things that are said to us, it takes much longer and there's a lot of work to do. So I think part of it is making space for you to hear yourself and to give yourself credit for what you're feeling and validating.
But what can they do on their own if they don't feel comfortable talking to somebody? How can they?
Well, that's what I said, making space to listen to your own your own reality, right? Giving yourself credit, taking time to take account for what's happening in your life, who you were when you were happy and who you are now, right? And shutting off what community says, right? And finding someone trusting.
Yeah.
It's hard. It is hard because we're so fearful, of what the rest of the community is going to say about us. We're fearful of being judged. And sometimes we have to listen to our own voices.
Definitely.
Right? And give our own voice credibility. Leaving is not always easy. And I think it's also important to note that someone is more likely to be killed when they're leaving than in any other time. So it's also trusting your instinct and looking at the pattern of what you've been through. We need to listen to survivors, right? And listen to what their experience is and what the patterns are. And I think it's really easy for us as community to give people advice when we're not living in their reality and we don't know what they're dealing with 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Easy said than done, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to listen and help people find their own voice and figure out the best time for them to make the decisions that are good for them. Our role as community is, of course, to empower, to remind people of their power, to help them find their voice, and to support them when they're ready to make certain choices. What becomes very difficult is we as community often get, we want people to work on our timeline. We want them to take those steps when we want them to take it once we find out.
Yeah.
As opposed to really asking folks, okay, what do you need? How can I support you? And when you're ready, I'm here to help you.
So just make them feel that you are there for them.
Right. And someone has to make a decision when they're ready to make it, right? But to know their own value and to know that they deserve the opportunity to live a happy life, to be free from violence in their relationships, and to know their own worth. And then they'll figure out their path. But we have to know our own worth and know that what we're experiencing and to just listen to ourselves, right? I think that's one thing someone could do. And to ask for help, and ask for help with people who have experience knowing, knowing how to navigate that. And it's okay if they don't agree with it, they'll do it in their own time, right? I think that's the important thing for us, to let people make the decisions that are best for them, and for them to learn to trust their instincts again, and to trust themselves, and to know what's important for them.
So, say if somebody calls me, for example, just as an example, what can I do as a friend, or even if I'm not a friend, if somebody just reached out to me, just listen?
I think listening is important.
Okay.
Helping direct them to resources based on what they're asking for.
Okay.
I think it's important for us to remind them of their worth and what they deserve, because I think a lot of times we're so, pray more, or, we want to give all advice. Why don't you do this, or whatever it is, and that may not be what actually will support them.
Yeah.
Right? I think also, so I think it's letting them lead, listening, and I know it's going to be easy to get frustrated because we give advice and we have to kind of be more thoughtful. It's not about us being experts. It's really listening and helping the individual figure out which path is best for them and supporting them on that path, and know that it'll take time. I mean, the statistics is that 7 times that someone tries to leave before they actually leave. And of course, that's going to vary for each individual.
It's different,
but also know that the reality of leaving an abusive situation is, what are the economics? What's immigration status? What are the safety concerns?
Financial.
What are the financial?
It's a big,
Yeah. If you can't work, if you're like, say, under age 4, right? How do you leave when you don't have income coming in to support yourself?
Do you see a lot of cases where there's a lot of financial disparity?
Oh, often, right? Like we have a lot of...
Because that's the number one power.
Yeah. I mean, but sometimes
Money
it's the opposite, right? Sometimes the person who's being abused might actually make the most money, right? But the abuser's just taking the money and expecting it. So there's many different realities.
Yeah, true.
And I think we have to understand that there's no one size fits all, in the sense of like, you could have, the person who's being the breadwinner, or you could have the person who is abusing being the one who like has immigration status and gets all the money. And then you might have the survivor who is on a dependent visa, and there is immigration relief available, temporary relief available, that folks can access. But again, people may not know what's available.
Right.
They may not know their rights. And they've heard someone say, well, you're not going to get access. You're not going to get custody of the kids because you don't work. And that's their big fear. And I think the reality is just get the information so you can make an informed choice instead of listening to the person who's abusing you.
Right.
Or listening to community members who may not have that information. Find the right sources of information. It doesn't have to be Raksha, but just find the right sources to know what your rights are, so that you can make an informed decision, not based on the person who is trying to control you.
True. So how, this is more for you now, you see so much of this. This is what you work with, right?
I do, but my coworkers see more.
Yeah. I mean, but you hear about it too, I'm sure. You hear about it a lot. How do you cope with this constant observation of such behavior, like unacceptable human behavior, suffering of one person? I'm sure it's emotionally draining, mentally draining, frustrating at times too.
It can be. Yes, it can be. I think that's the importance of like having supervision or connecting with other folks. Some folks having their own therapy to address it. But it's also, you have to see life fully, right? You have to see the positives and the negatives.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's really easy. I can think of times where, all I could see was the bad, right? And
that's what I meant. Has it changed you in any way?
In some ways, yeah. It's like anybody could be abusive. Like, you can sit there and think, oh, this is such a good person. And you just want to be like, anybody can be abusive.
Yeah.
There's so much that we don't see in people, right? There's so much good that we don't see in people, and there's so much bad that we don't see in people. And then it makes you think about, like, what creates people to be this way, right? Why are people so mean and horrible to each other? And I think this also goes into your spirituality.
Yes.
Right?
So
we should talk to that. Yeah. I mean, and there's faith that we can see good. I think, like, as I talked about my dad, right? I used to be scared of him. And then I began to really understand what was going on. But he had to also do his own healing, right?
Yeah.
For me to see all that he is and not be scared of him, and to have that reality. Like, he was my biggest supporter when I started doing work around Raksha and working in this gender-based violence. My mom would just
gave you the flyer. So,
but even my mom, like, I wasn't making a lot of money. Honestly, I wasn't making a lot of money, and of course, every Disney parent wants their kid to do well.
Yes.
And make a lot of money, and I wasn't, honestly, because I was following my passion. And I remember my mom fighting with my dad, and she said this after he had passed away, and she was like, why do you keep, letting her do what she wants? She's driving a beat up car, all this stuff. And he said, he stopped her. And she's doing important work. And he would always support me. And so,
that's amazing.
You know what I mean? And so when you can see your own father shift, right? I'm not saying that he was this horrible controlling. I think he was trying to control certain things based on his past and his traumas. Is it as severe as some of the other things that we see? No, it wasn't. So I think that it's important that people can change if they want to change. I think that's the important thing of, like, why counseling is important, but we have to want that change for ourselves.
I think that is important. You should want, it should be the behavior. Yeah.
And to know that there's good people. I think one of the things that I always say about Raksha, when I was younger, I used to avoid, I was always wanting to avoid the Desi community. I really didn't want to be involved.
Why is that?
Because it's the same thing you talked about earlier, is like the judgment, the gossiping.
Yeah.
If you weren't meeting certain things, people would judge you, and I didn't want to deal with that. So I would avoid, honestly, the Desi community. And so being involved in Raksha also helped me find people who believe similar things that I do, who are committed to making change in community. And I'm not saying, like, that this community is the only community that deals with violence and all this. All of our communities deal with it. There's a culture of violence.
I was reading a psychology magazine, like, it's a journal, just a few days back, and it said that in the U.S. itself, over 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have reported abuse.
Right.
Now, stats can be different depending upon what you read, but, like, this is the number I came across.
So there's a culture of violence in all of our communities. Yeah. How it plays out might be different based on our community, but it is prevalent in all of our communities. And I think that's the other thing that I learned, in doing this work. And part of what I also do is I train on culture and how do we navigate, culture. So I think it's important to know that this is something that's prevalent. We have folks that are wanting to make change in all of our communities, and we have folks that want to keep the status quo in all of our communities.
Yes.
And so when you look at it that point, you just try to work with what you got and try to work to make change, and hope that, when you're able to see the changes in some individuals, that keeps you going in doing this work, right? Yeah. And I'm lucky to have been in this organization as long as I have, because we can definitely see people who are on the other side. Of what's happening. We have one person who wants to do a run in August because she wants to celebrate that she left 25 years ago in August, right?
Wow. Okay.
And to be able to see her when she was scared and leaving the abusive situation, and to see her now strong and powerful and doing things that she didn't think she would ever be able to do, is the gift of having been with this organization as long as I have. Because I would not have seen that if I wasn't still here.
Yeah.
Right? So you know that people can change and people can find their own voice, and that there is life after divorce. You know, you will find the friends that will stand by you, and the ones who don't, then you really learned who they are.
They never were your friends, yeah.
Right. And I think we learn that in everything in life, whether we're dealing with divorce, whether we're dealing with, you know, a mental illness or mental challenge, right? Yeah. Or maybe we lose a job, right? You learn and you're like trying to find a new job, or you're having to restart something new, or maybe we've dealt with the death of a loved one.
Right.
The friends that stay by us through those tough times are the ones that
are the real people, yeah.
And I think that's where we have to make are we holding on to people that we really shouldn't?
True.
You know, who really aren't there for us? Or do we really, you know, that's the opportunity when you deal with difficult moments, you find out who your real friends are.
Yeah.
And those are the ones you decide to keep. Right.
Wow. Yeah. A lot of deep topics, conversations. Do you want to talk about any upcoming events?
Well, yes. So hopefully around August 3rd, we're going to partner with
this run.
This run, or Solidarity Walk, actually, is what we're going to do that with NAP, which is the National Association of Asian American Professionals, and Kimberly Clark, and maybe we'll have a few other partners, like a back to school drive for us last year, and then we, you know, engaged some of the volunteers that were members of the association to create like bags and stuff for the survivors we work with, and so. We're hoping to do a walk on August 3rd to commemorate the 25 years after this one survivor left.
Yeah.
But also include the backpack drive. And her kids were just, you know, children. I mean, they were little ones when they left. And we'll probably get some diapers and some other stuff for the organization. And then, of course, December 6th is 𝐬𝐿 𝐸𝐿, which is an evening in the name of Raksha, which you have volunteered for, volunteered your voice and singing celebrating music.
I have, yeah.
And that's how many people have given it to Raksha, is through music, right? Like our first fundraiser was about music.
Yes.
And historically, 𝐬𝐿 has been about how do we bring music to raise money for an important cause.
Yeah.
Ones that, you know, a cause that most people may not believe in, but yet, you know, that's a beautiful story about 𝐸𝐿, right? He was somebody that helped somebody in the community.
Yes.
And he wanted to use music as a way to raise funds for Raksha.
I've done so much too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think music has been a long part of our history, as far as how we raise money and how music has brought community together to support Raksha.
Nice. Before we wind up, I always like to end with like a spirituality. Has this made you any more spiritual, or has that helped you?
I think so, probably. You know, I think I was telling you how, and so much goes back to my dad, right? How my spirituality is not really focused on formalized religion, right? It is about...
It's not the rituals, yeah.
It's not the rituals. I have a hard time with formal religion because I think people don't take what the value is about, and what they do is they still do harm. Right? So like even in Hinduism, right? We're not supposed to do harm, but yet we use our religion and our faith as a way, not everybody, but many people use the name of religion as a way to hurt others, right? To kill others, to condemn and judge others. And that's the formal part of religion. I can't deal with any of the religions because it's often misused by folks in power. Again, about power and control, as opposed to doing good. But spirituality to me is about having faith that sometimes our experiences give us wisdom to show up in a different way. And my father, I think, questioned a lot of the religions, did his own work, and felt like they were all connected in some shape, way, or form. So any of the spirituality I have is probably from conversations with my father.
Okay.
And he knew, I was like, if I can't see it, it's not real.
Yeah.
But you can see me. Do you believe in me? And I'd be like, yeah, of course. And so for me, the spirituality is based on love. Like, I loved him, and my spirituality and my faith is often focused on the love I have with him and the things that he taught me about. How do you show up as a good person? How do you see the best in people? How do you show compassion even if someone's hard?
Very important, yeah.
And a great example is, you know, I talked about the alcoholic uncle that I grew up with, and I remember he ended up in the hospital, and he'd caused so much chaos in our lives. The rest of the family, my mom was, why are you helping him? He's like, let me at least buy him a shirt, let me at least do this. But he finally made the decision to no longer let this person back into our home. right? He wasn't an actual uncle, he was a partner, but he decided no more. But he still was like, he would still want to make sure he's okay. Because my dad wanted to be a good human being. He had compassion. And I think while sometimes we've got to set our boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with setting our boundaries and looking out for ourselves and our safety and our well-being, it's okay to still have compassion to want good.
Definitely.
For individuals, and you want them to heal, right? And it's finding that balance. Like, how do we show compassion for someone without losing ourselves in the process? Which goes back even to domestic violence, right? How many survivors care about the person? They legitimately love the person they may have married, or they care about them. But yet, how do you still also hold on to your own well-being,
boundaries,
and your own dignity, and know your boundaries? And even that's a lesson that's like South Asians we need to learn every day.
Yeah,
we're told to give ourselves, to give
totally, and not just in. I think even like friendships, in all relationships.
Yeah,
it's important.
We have to have that balance of making sure we're taking. Because again, we can't pour from an empty cup.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so we need to make sure we're doing. And I'm still learning this and trying to figure this out, right? But how do we really make sure we're taking care of ourselves and not just giving all of ourselves where we have nothing for our own joy, our own growth, and our own well-being?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Aparna. This was a lot.
I know, and I don't even think we dived into everything.
No. You will have to come back.
I'd be happy to come back.
I do want to ask you one thing. Anything that you're passionate about, the last segment of the podcast is Tell It As It Is. Mm-hmm. Anything that you really feel from the heart that you just want to share, like a quick minute?
I mean, I really think we got to do so much healing, right? And
as a community,
all communities, right? I think there's so much mental health that we have to address after the pandemic, but also all the violence that we're seeing. And how do we show up with love and compassion for each other and have real conversations?
Yeah, whether you are in a romantic relationship, whether you are in a friendship, workplace, any relationship, everything.
Yeah, being able to show dignity and respect to each other, but still stand our ground and not allow people to disrespect us. And I think there's a lot of work that we need to do. So I feel really passionate about, we still have a lot of healing work to do in general, but also what's been happening since 2020 that we have not addressed. And I really want us to find ways to do that.
Okay. Well, that will be it for now. We definitely have to meet.
Yes.
You have to come back. Thank you so much for all of your insight, and was amazing. I had goosebumps a few times. You were talking about, especially about your dad. I thought I knew so much about Raksha. I took pride in that, but I did not. I found out so much about you, about the organization. And for our viewers, the link for Raksha is down below the episode if they want to click.
www.raksha.org. You can follow us on our socials, which is at Raksha Inc. And then if you need to call, it's 404-876-0670. Be sure to leave a message because we just don't call people back unless we know it's safe to do so.
And the number too, probably.
404-876-0670.
No, like their phone number or...
Yeah, their phone number, leave a message. A lot of people may not leave messages but it's important to leave a message, and it's important to call for yourself.
And even if they're not in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
anybody can call.
Our focus is the state of Georgia, and if you're in another state and there's a sister organization, we would definitely refer you to that. But it is important for someone to call for themselves. A third party calling, unless there's a reason why they can't call, we'll talk to you. But if you say, "Oh, I need you to call my friend at this number," we're not going to call because we don't know the implications of calling that number.
Okay.
So I think that's important to know.
Yeah, and everything you said in the link, I'm going to put it in the bio, like under the episode link also. So thank you so much again for coming, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you back soon again.
Thank you.